Good evening and welcome to Cepher Moments. Tonight, a conversation among friends. We're going to dedicate tonight to the idea of us discussing topics that mean something to you. And for those of you who have joined us at the Zoom link, we may be also, with your permission, showing your face from time to time. Yes, indeed. But this is another edition of Cepher Moments. And of course, tonight, we're going to be talking about those points that you would like to discuss, issues of spirituality, issues of what we find in scripture, discussions among the important things that have great deal of meaning to all of us. So I'm looking forward to this occasion tonight, and thank you for being here. All right. So with that, let's see if we can get started here with our Cepher Moments. All right, let me see if I can come up here on the screen here a little bit. Hey, there I am. What do you know? All right, great, excellent. Okay, I want to encourage you, those of you who are members of the Telegram channel on Radio Free Alaska or on the Stephen Pigeon chat, will find the link to this particular Zoom presentation. You can join it at any time during the conversation. Okay? All right, fantastic. Okay, let's see here just a minute. Looking around here, taking a look what we can do. All right. So we're going to begin a little bit with some of the topical points that have been coming up over the year. As you know, there are several dominant issues that have risen amongst the brethren. And some of these issues are, I think, kind of important. And some of these issues are things that have been in debate for a long time. For instance, the falling of the Sabbath. When did the Sabbath fall? And how do we know this? That's one discussion point. Another discussion point is, of course, the calendar. And the calendar, of course, is a substantial issue because the calendar is one that is requiring us to understand, is it a 360-day calendar? Is it a 364-day calendar? Is it a 13th month calendar? Is it a lunar calendar? Is it a solely lunar calendar? Is it any of these things? These are all questions that become very, very important. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. Of course, we're going to raise the notorious issue of the status of flat Earth. And of course, this is an issue that cannot be avoided. We're going to talk about it a little bit. We're going to talk about the condition of the argument, not the argument itself, the condition of the argument. And so that will be an important factor in tonight's discussion. Now, in addition to that, there's other things that I do want to discuss that I think are relevant to where we are at this point. For instance, I think it's important for us to talk about the idea of whether or not we know of the true location of Jerusalem. It's another topic that's come up, and the Holy Land. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But I think we also have to talk about the spiritual condition of the country. And I think that's a significant issue, particularly in light of what we see concerning the Christian church. We are going to talk about that a little bit tonight, too. There's been some very interesting points that have been raised, for instance. And hi, Joy, how are you? Good to see you.
Fine. Good to see you too.
Glad you're here. And hopefully we'll get a crowd here tonight. But we're going to not only here at our Zoom meeting, by the way, but we're also going to be looking at the chat. We're going to be looking at the chat to see what is going on with questions and ideas from the chat about things we're going to touch about. So one thing, like for instance, to give you an example, just we're opening up here. Chuck Deuce's 9/11 says you can't prove the calendar no matter what you use or do. So we should assume the calendar that we mostly understand and should stand. Okay, now this is a very good point because, of course, the calendar has been raised as an issue of contention among the brethren. And this issue of contention is one that there's lots of good reason for seeing these different calendars. But it does become a point of concern when we talk about, all right, when do we have the feasts? These are kind of an important issue. When is the first day of Matzah, for instance? When is the first day of Sukkot? These are kind of issues, and they're important issues that we discuss these. And also, and then Debbie says, yes, let's discuss world events. So maybe what I think I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to get into the world events here very quickly, but Dan Williams has asked a question here, and I'm just going to pose it here very quickly. And he says, please talk about the location of the Holy Land in Jerusalem. Did the Maccabees move Jerusalem to the present location? Now, I don't think that the Maccabees moved the location to the present location, but I think there is a chance that the Maccabees declared a city to be Jerusalem that may not have been Jerusalem. Now, there's a couple of reasons why I say that, and I'm just going to throw this out on the table. We might as well get started here as any place else. But you have something that takes place in, this is in Genesis 2. And this is something that's very interesting because we all know that when we talk about Jerusalem, one of the chief elements of proof is that the Gihon Springs runs through Jerusalem, the Gihon Springs. Okay, well, this is interesting because when we avoid the idea of people doing interpretation and we use a transliteration for the names that actually appear in the text, we find something very interesting. So in Genesis 2, Bereshith 2, we see this at beginning of verse 10, and a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted, and it came into four heads. The first river is called Pishon. That is it which compasses the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. Okay, so we have something very clear that this river Pishon runs through a land that is filled with gold. And the gold of that land is good. And there's also bdellium and beryl stone. Now, beryl stone is very interesting because when you look at onyx, which is a translation that is not as accurate as it should be, onyx, you know, it's very funny. When I started looking at these, there's really three forms of onyx that are really quite popular. You may have heard of them. There's black onyx, there's white onyx, and there is a fabulously expensive and very rare red onyx that comes out of Utah. However, the true word there is beryl, and the beryl is actually a green stone, a pale green stone, like as in an aquamarine. And the aquamarines are very interesting because they also come out of the same region where there is gold. Now, the next river that's named is the Gihon. Now, this is the river that everybody is told is a spring that runs through downtown Jerusalem. But listen to what it says here in this passage. And the name of the second river is Gihon. This is Bereshith 13, chapter 2, verse 10. The same it is that compasses the whole land of Cush. It compasses the land of Cush. Now, I don't know anybody that's ever claimed that Jerusalem, the modern day Jerusalem, is in the land of Cush. Yet they claim that the water that runs beneath it is the Gihon spring. Is it in the land of Cush? And the answer is no, it's not in the land of Cush. The land of Cush is often interpreted in most English translations as Ethiopia. The land of Put is often interpreted as Libya. And so this is very interesting because Cush is to the east of Mitzrayim. And remember, we're talking about the children of Ham here, the children of Ham. And the children of Ham, Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan, Jubilees indicates that at the time of the division of the land, at the time of Peleg, that Cush was to the east, and to the west of Cush, Mitzrayim, and to the west of Mitzrayim, Put, and to the west of Put, Canaan, to the west of Libya and Algeria, Canaan. So this becomes a very interesting issue. All right, now as we were talking about this, and I'm going to do I think I'm going to do a complete teaching on this as we talk about the promised land. That's what we're going to be dealing with. We're going to be dealing with the covenant land given to Abraham, the promised land. What are its parameters and conditions? What is it described as? Well, we see it described in several places, but as part of that description, we see what? We see that it is, that the land is filled with gold, with copper, with iron, with almond trees, with appropriate for olive gardens, appropriate for vineyards, right? A land of milk and honey. And, and a lot of this is inference that there would be bees that would be there, honey would be there. But one thing we discovered in reading the Torah portion last week that was very, very interesting, which is that there were gifts given by Yaakov, who would become Yasharel, to his sons to take to Yosef during the time of the famine. Take these gifts up here and give them these gifts so he knows that we're not just beggars that are coming here. We're going to come here with these gifts, and then from these gifts, we want to be able to get wheat with also money, right? And so they went up to Mitzrayim, or they went down to Mitzrayim, and when they went down to Mitzrayim, they brought with them balm, almonds, myrrh. They brought with them myrrh. Now, myrrh is a very interesting thing, because you might remember that myrrh was also brought by the Magi to the Mashiach at the time of his birth. And so what we see is that the Magi were in a situation where they came in and brought myrrh. Now, what was myrrh? Well, myrrh is an incense. It's a form of incense, and it's taken from the sap of a tree. And the tree that it's taken from is called the Commiphora tree. So this was a sap that was readily available. It'd be like living in New England and getting maple syrup, right? You're going to be able to get maple syrup from the maple trees in New England. Now, it's the same thing here. They were able to get myrrh from the sap of the trees, which is where they were. And so what were the trees? Well, the trees are called Commiphora, and the Commiphora trees, their natural habitat is Somalia and Ethiopia, which, by the way, is what most interpreters say is Cush. So this is very interesting that myrrh would come out of Cush too, same place you find the Gihon Springs. Now, I find that very fascinating. And I find it also fascinating that these other elements, I'll give you another set of elements that are very, very keen. The priesthood would be wearing an ephod that was covered with precious stones, diamonds, rubies, sapphires, emeralds, etc. Where did they get these stones? They certainly didn't get them out of modern day Israel. In fact, the area that is modern day Israel has never had gold, never had iron. It's never had precious stones. And for the most part, there were no indigenous trees growing there. So we've got a problem. Now, when you look at Genesis 13:1, you see that Abraham went south from Mitzrayim, and Mitzrayim is a populated area around the river we today call the Nile, but it was not called the Nile in Scripture. You cannot find the word Nile in Scripture unless it's misinterpreted. Most likely, it was the Pishon River, which ran through the land of Havilah, and Havilah had gold that was good. Well, one of the things we see today is that the Nile River is running through South Sudan, and Sudan is the third largest producer of gold in the world this very day. So we've got some interesting things. Is there gold in the land of Havilah? Yes. And this gold is what we call in the land of Mitzrayim. And Abraham went south from Mitzrayim to find the Holy Land. And when he went south to find the Holy Land, he found a place that was full of gold and iron and copper, and also was well watered. When he went there with Lot, it was well watered. That's what's referred to it. It says it's well watered. So we have some very interesting information that casts a shadow of doubt upon Jerusalem. Did the Maccabees go into a town that they found there and say, oh, this place, which could have been, by the way, a Zoroastrian temple that was built there, could have been a Greek temple that had been built there to Jupiter, but they found a temple, and the temple they found was a temple that they said had been desecrated because it had a statue of Jupiter. They were sacrificing.
Everybody.
And in addition to that, they also found what? They found that there was a gymnasium in front of it. Now, a gymnasium in front of the temple gives you some idea that, hey, wait a minute. What's a
Which
gymnasium?
one was he was posting on Thursday on YouTube? I don't
Hold
think
on.
he's doing it on YouTube anymore.
Oh, no, just wait a second now. Who's doing all this talking over here? Let's see. That would be Pam. Hey, Pam, how are you?
Sorry.
No problem. Good to see you. Glad you're here. Okay. And if you guys, if you turn your cameras on, you'll also be live on screen. Okay. All right. All right. So let me go back to what I was talking about there. Hi, Katia. Good to see you. And let's see who else is going to be joining us here. All right. So when we talk about this now, all I'm saying is that if the Maccabees did in fact identify something different, like a Persian temple, suppose it was a Persian temple. Suppose it was a Zoroastrian temple. Suppose it was a Greek temple. Now remember, the Greeks had been present there for 2 centuries at the point by the time the Maccabees show up. The Greeks have been there for 2 centuries. And they come in and they say, well, we think this was the temple of Solomon, or this was the second temple that was built by Ezra. Therefore, we're going to clean it up. We're going to put in a new altar. We're going to put in a Hanukkah instead of a menorah. We're going to try to practice the faith that used to be practiced here, but we're going to modify it. We're going to put our own opinions about what's actually written in that faith. We're going to call it the Talmud. So the Talmud was born about 165 BC, the Yerushalmi Talmud. And this Talmud came forward, and this was the condition of the place at the time the Mashiach was born. Now, that's very interesting. Hi, Sherry Slama, good to see you. When we look at, we see the, when we look and we see what has been allocated, what has been laid out, and says that when we talk about Mashiach, something that came to me in the last Cepher Moments, and I put it up here on this screen, had to do with the fact that Mashiach came in the line of Perez. And I've often asked myself the question, why did Mashiach come in the line of Perez and not in the line of Zerach, when Zerach is the primogenitor? He was the firstborn. His hand came out, the midwife put the red ribbon on it, the hand withdrew, and then Perez was born. And literally the name Perez means, this breach be upon you. Why would Mashiach be born in the line of Perez? Well, John the Baptist tells us why. Behold the Lamb of Yahweh that takes away the sins of the world. Now, this is an extremely important point, because the Torah specifies in the Yom Kippur ritual that 2 goats would be selected. One would be selected for a blood sacrifice, and the other would have a red ribbon tied around it and cast into the wilderness. So Zerach had a red ribbon tied around his hand, and the house of Zerach was cast into the wilderness. But the house of Perez ultimately was going to have to be the blood sacrifice for the sins of mankind. This is why when John saw him, he recognized that he was the Lamb of Yah, because he was the living sacrifice that would be the sacrifice not for the children of Yasharel, not for the children of Judah, but rather for the whole world, right? It would be the whole world. Okay, so under these circumstances, is it possible that Mashiach would have to appear in this Maccabean selected city? Yes, of course it would be, because the house of Perez was allocated in this. Now remember, the house of Perez had been pushed out of Jerusalem by the time Mashiach arrives for about 6 centuries. 6 centuries. Think about that. And I mean, the equivalent would be going back to the 1400s, right? Imagine if there was a city here in America that had been built up. Columbus shows up and burns the city down and kicks the people out of that city. 600 years later, they come back and go, oh, yeah, that's where it was. Really? And so this is why I'm saying to you that when you look at this, when you see what is going on with this kind of issue, I'm not saying necessarily where Jerusalem is, but I'm saying the Holy Land is most likely someplace different than what we call the nation of Israel. Okay. All right. Okay. Now, while we're talking about these things, let's join the Zoom folks here. Okay, Joy, Sherry, and Katia. I'm glad you guys have joined us on Zoom. Katia, I haven't spoken with you before. Would you like to say something? Yes, you would.
I'm pretty new here, so I
Okay.
really appreciate your show. It's very interesting.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're with us. I'm glad you're with us. And I see Dennis and Faye have joined us, and Victoria is here with us, and Pam Garcia is with us, and Diane Grisbowski is with us. So, like I say, as we get into this further, I want you guys to feel free to add comments into this because this is conversation tonight. Okay. This is conversation, and this is what we're doing. Well, I want to be able for us to have the freedom to speak a little bit, okay, about where we're going. Now, there's been some discussion too. I want to kind of come back to current events now. And this is something that I think we need to discuss because I just recently watched a very interesting video from a Muslim imam, very well schooled in theology, and somebody who is very eloquent in his speech and also an ardent Muslim. You know, he, of course, believes in his faith. And so he does not see any deficits in the Islamic faith. He instead sees deficits in Judaism, and he sees deficits in Christianity. Now, he's raised a couple of very interesting points. He said it's very interesting because in Islam, they believe that they are following the true God that the Jews did not follow. That, in fact, the reason the Jews were kicked out of Jerusalem in 586 BC had to do with the fact that they were an immoral people. Now, and this is not a claim that is made in the Quran, but rather this is a claim that is made in the Tanakh, right? It's made in the Tanakh. So with that being said, I mean, I'm gonna ask you, Sherry, am I right about this? Does the Old Testament say that Jerusalem was destroyed in 586 BC because of the sins of the kings of Judea? Am I right about this?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you know, you can see Manasseh was so wicked. I mean, it's talked about in Second Baruch to some degree, the kinds of things he did. He put up idols all over. He put up a 5-headed god in the middle of the city. He worshipped everything but Yah. He engaged in prostitution. And something that I'm going to throw out here for another discussion point is he passed his children through the fire. Now, I want to throw something out to you. When you're talking about passing children through the fire, I often thought, oh, gee, they put up a big, they bought a bunch of bonfire together, materials, set a fire, and then we had flames going on, and then they passed the kids through that. Well, no. What if the fire was some kind of radiation? They passed the kids through some kind of radioactivity that caused mutation to their DNA. What if that's what was going on? So, I mean, there's things happening there that obviously we don't know what it is in particular, but I'm just going to throw that idea out. We might be able to talk about it as we go.
I have an idea, maybe too. What if the fire was indoctrinating them in the ways of Satanism, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so it's a form. So when you're talking about the fire passing them through the fire, it was a baptism of fire in some kind of dark forces. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, something like that. Training their kids up in these dark forces, instead of the way of Yahuwah.
Yeah, Yeah. Very good point. Very good point. Now, I want to make a point here as to what we've been saying before. Chuck Deuce's 9/11 says Timna Valley, 19 miles north of the Gulf of Aqaba, is rich in copper and has been mined there since the 5th century BC. Well, yeah, that may be true, but where's the gold? Where's the iron? Where's the gemstones? Where's the Kamifora trees? Where are all those? Right? Okay. So I'm just going to throw that out there. Okay. So as we keep going on this kind of subject, we can see here that that these kinds of premises, the sins of Manasseh, which were enormous, were picked up again by the son of Josiah, Josiyahu. They were picked up by him, who is Yekoniyahu, and Yekoniyahu went back to the sins of Manasseh. In other words, and this kind of, I'm going to throw this out as we talk about the modern world too. When you look at the sins of Yekoniyahu, he went back to the kind of secular state, this kind of idea that, well, we have a pop culture going on here, and our pop culture allows us to worship Astarte. It allows us to worship Baal. It allows us to worship Asmodeus. It allows us to worship, all these other things. And who are you to take that away from us? That's what we're used to. And when you compare that to where we are in America, right? Where we are in America, we've had such an explosion of diversity in America that what is the common American faith? Anybody got an idea? What is the common American faith? If you were to,
Me, myself, and I.
yeah, me, myself, and I.
Seems to be being woke too.
Yeah. And wokeism, me, myself, and I, self-centeredism, maybe money. I mean, there's lots of things that are on the table for the American faith that is other than the faith of the Pilgrims when they came to the States to build the place, right? When they risked their lives to build some kind of a culture here. And it's funny how quickly it went south, by the way. The fellow who formed, we studied this at Cepher Academy in American history. The fellow who formed the Baptist Church, he was a guy named Roger Williams. And he wrote a book. He got kicked out of the Massachusetts colony for being a heretic because he believed that the edicts of Scripture should be subjected to a democratic vote. Let's vote on that. Thou shalt not kill. Let's vote on that. Thou shalt not steal. Let's vote on that. And he was the founder of the American Baptist denomination. And he was also the founder of Rhode Island, a guy named Roger Williams. And the book he wrote to justify his pulling away from Puritanism and his pulling away from the Pilgrim's philosophy was burned in London. It was burned in London. Very interesting situation, right? Okay. So as we look at this kind of thing, we can see that Israel did the same thing. So we are so contaminated right now. The water is so contaminated in the United States. Let me ask you, Katya, let's just get your opinion on this. Do you think it's possible for the United States to reform itself like Josiah reformed Israel in the course of his leadership? Is it possible for the United States to become a singular faith again?
No.
I don't see it possible. There's too much wokeness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so the water, what you're saying is that the water is too polluted
Working.
to restore it.
Oh,
Am I right about that?
Yes.
Yeah. I tend to see it that way myself. Okay. All right. Now let's continue on. Let's keep going here. Okay. So here's something here. The Pacheco family says serving thyself is the common U.S. deity. Just like you said, Joy. There it is. Serving thyself. Okay. All right. Now, James Stephen Emery has lifted an issue, and I'm going to raise it before us right now. Tonight is the winter solstice, December 21st, 2023. That's correct. Destined to be one of the bloodiest, most perilous times of the year, both spiritually and physically, especially for children and innocence. I can tell you, James, I'll tell you, I'd like to be able to speak to that. I don't have a lot of knowledge on what the dark forces have in mind tonight, winter solstice, but it would not surprise me that this is not a high satanic feast tonight. For us, it's not a high satanic feast. For us, it's the marker of the winter solstice. It's the shortest day of the year. Tomorrow we start gaining daylight, right? And that's about it. All right. Now, Blackie Mahoney says, what is the dominant faith in the United States? Do what thou wilt. Now, take a look at this for a minute. This Muslim commentator, when he was talking about the differences between Judaism and Islam and, of course, Christianity, he said the mistake that Judaism made is that they never restored themselves to morality. They never restored themselves to being a moral people. And the Talmud is, of course, full of this, because the Talmud has many, many contradictions to the Torah inside the Talmud. But also, you also see that he said the Christian faith made the big error by elevating Jesus to God, which when he was just a man. Now, even though Islam, and it's very interesting that Islam recognizes that Mashiach came in the flesh. Islam recognizes that. Judaism does not. But here's the problem with that take. As I mentioned to you before, you see very clearly, you see something so buried in the text, it's hard to say that there is not supernatural agency at work. When the line of Phares would produce the ultimate blood sacrifice that would accomplish the atonement for the sins of mankind. That is something that is so buried in the text. I don't know how many people have ever seen that before. That Zerach, the primogenitor, would have a red ribbon tied on his hand and cast into the wilderness, and the one that would be retained that breached the status of primogenitor. Look what happened to the family that breached. They had 14 generations on the throne of Judea, and almost every single one of those kings breached. From David's adultery and David's murder of Uzziah, to Solomon's 1,000 wives and his idolatry and the placing of all kinds of pagan idols in Jerusalem, to his sons' intransigence, which caused the civil war, to the sins of Manasseh, and on and on and on the list goes. And Yah gave them 14 generations to get it right, and they didn't. And he said, that's the end of it. You guys are done. Boom. And when they were taken into captivity, even though the Jewish people, not the Jewish people, but the people of Yehud, were allowed to return after 70 years, which did happen, but it was a small group. The kingdom of Yehud was never allowed to return, and none of the sons of David were allowed to sit on the throne. They were exilarch kings. And that's what Matthew 1 tells you. All the way down to the father of Miriam, exilarch kings, not allowed to sit on the throne. There was no throne for them because there was no kingdom for them. And the kingdom of Yehud after 586 BC was never restored. The temple that people readily admit, the historians readily call what? Herod's temple. There are many people who say, well, that was the second temple. Well, really, no, it wasn't the second temple. It was Herod's temple. Where was the second temple? Well, who knows? Now, there are many people who think, well, the second temple, we found evidence of it in the city of David, which is below the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Don't tell the Jews that. They'll kick you out of the country. They don't want to believe that anything in the city of David resembles anything like Solomon's temple when Solomon's temple was originally on the Temple Mount. Although the Muslims say that what they found on the Temple Mount when they got there was a garbage dump. So you've got some interesting information there, right? So the second temple, no. Herod's temple was probably the third temple. And it was the third temple built by Herod, maybe 10 BC, maybe 12 BC, right in that range. How do we know this? Because Herod used huge limestone blocks to construct. You can go up to Caesarea, which is on the coast, and see where Herod built his winter palace, his summer palace. And his summer palace had huge limestone blocks. They built a chariot hippodrome there for chariot races. They built a huge port so Roman ships could land. He built himself a big palace that had what do they call them? Those zero line pools. You know, the water flows over the top of the pool, and so you can't tell the edge of the pool from the Mediterranean kind of thing. He had one of those pools. That's where he drowned one of his sons. And he built a small city there. Then his winter palace was built up on a high mountain overlooking the Dead Sea at Masada. They know that he was the one that built the wall there at the Fortress Antonia because they found Roman coins underneath that wall dated from 10 BC, underneath the wall. How do you put a Roman coin under a wall that's pre-constructed? It was a Roman coin that was laying there when you put the stones up. So anything that appears under the Temple Mount, like the so-called Hezekiah's Tunnel, was a construct that came from 10 BC and on. So you can see, and Hezekiah's temple also, you can see this in the Gospels, had Ezekiel temple practices going on. So what does this tell you? The third temple was already built, and it was built according to Ezekiel's protocol, using the hand as a cubit, not the fingertip to the elbow cubit that you use when you're talking about Noah, but the hand shape as the cubit. Interesting, eh? So when you have teachers now come to you and say, gee, we're waiting for Ezekiel's temple to be built so we can start into the animal sacrifices again. No, it was already built. They were already following Ezekiel's protocol. And equally true, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was no Ark of the Covenant inside the second temple, and there was no Ark of the Covenant inside Herod's temple. So what high priest would be worried about entering into the Holy of Holies if there was no Ark of the Covenant there? They wouldn't be worried about it at all, would they? So it was ritual they were performing, and they were doing what they thought had been done in the kingdom of David, in the kingdom of Judea. Let's do what they did, even though it's not the same thing. Like, for instance, you guys know that we just went through Hanukkah, right? Right? We just went through Hanukkah. Now, when we went through Hanukkah, what does Hanukkah mean? Sherry, do you know what Hanukkah means?
You know what? I don't do Hanukkah. It's something about the rededication of the temple.
Yeah, it means dedication.
Right.
It means dedication. Now, Hanukkah is very interesting because the word Hanukkah does appear in the Tanakh, excluding Maccabees. It does appear. And where does it appear? At the dedication of Solomon's temple, which began on the 15th day of the 7th month. That is to say that the original Hanukkah fell on Sukkot, the 15th day of the 7th month. And you can go back and read it in, I believe it's in 2 Kings. It's 1 Kings, maybe. 1 Kings. And it talks about how that they had this huge feast. Solomon, now here, this is another thing we talk about this being the Holy Land. 1 Kings tells us that Solomon sacrificed 10,000 bulls. And even more sheep. How many acres of grassland did it take to support 10,000 bulls? Huh? Could that be done in the tiny nation of Israel? I don't think so. 10,000 bulls and even more sheep. You know, we started looking at this idea of the cattle, the sheep, the asses, the camels, etc., that came out of Egypt with the Exodus. So Moshe left Egypt with about 2.4 million people. How do we know that? Because Numbers, chapter 1 and chapter 2 tells us how many guys were in the army. 20 years old and up that were willing to fight, and there was 603,000 of them. So when you count women and children and the men that were unable to fight, it was about 2.4 million people. Exodus 10 tells us that Moshe tells Pharaoh, we're going to leave, and we're not leaving a single hoof behind. Not one camel, not one ass, not one cow, not one sheep. They're all coming with us. All right, let's assume that there was only one cow per person. That's 2.4 million cows. Let's assume it was a lot less than that. Maybe it was 600,000 cows. A cow in a 70-degree day drinks 20 gallons of water. So what are we talking about when we're talking about 600,000 cows? How much water are they drinking? Oh, about 12 million gallons a day. Plus 2.4 million people. How many gallons of water are they drinking a day? So you're going to have to show me how an exodus through the high and dry Sinai and then down the coast of the saltwater Red Sea into a desert that constitutes the Saudi Arabia was capable of providing some 20 million gallons of water a day to this exodus. Furthermore, if you take 2.4 million and you put them side by side, you know, husband and wife, right and left, two people side by side, and you started marching them out, the front of the line would reach modern-day Jerusalem before the back of the line left Cairo. These are the kinds of anomalies when you start looking at the facts, you have to ask yourself the question, is this right? Is this where they went? Is this how they did it? You know, these are kind of large questions, right? Okay. So, so let's see. Now, here we see Rick Baker asks a question. Could it be possible that America fits the profile of the new covenant land flowing with milk and honey? It has all the elements mentioned. Yeah, now, Rick, I'll tell you, there have been several people that have raised that issue. You know, is it possible that North America was the Holy Land? Well, I mean, it's possible that that was the case. It's possible that it qualifies. Although I can tell you that the historical record is very interesting when you look at the record. Now let's talk about since you raised this, let's talk a little bit about the antediluvian record. All right, but hold on before we do. I want to see if we have any other. Let me see. We got the chat going on here too. I want to make sure I catch this. Okay. Yeah, so Joy asked, was the Temple of Zadok counted as one of the temples? I don't think so. I don't think so. Okay. All right, now here, Joy, you also make the point here that on one of your properties, you keep one bull with 4 females. When they would calve, after their calves were weaned, that had to be on 200 acres. Is that 200 acres per cow? Is that what that is?
No, it was over 200 acres for all 4 of them. Of course, you got to understand, we're feeding round bales. And we do have a spring. Now we have another larger property that has like 2 bulls and about 8 mamas. And, you know, they're always bred. And then after the calves are fatted, they're always sold. So it's only that amount, like one bull on the over 200 acres with the mama cows, and then 2+ bulls on over 700 acres with about 6 cows.
Okay, but they're not free ranging, right? They're not free ranging. You're feeding
They
them.
are free ranging, but we are feeding them. Yes, we feed them feed as well as hay, and we're fortunate on one of them that we have a spring, but we still have to water them. Like, you know, Texas, we couldn't even have a garden last year. It was so hot. We have a really deep well, but there were wells across the street that went dry.
It went dry. Yeah. Very dangerous. But the thing
Yes.
is that when we talk about 10,000 head of cattle, 10,000 bulls, right? Or let's
Yeah,
call it
that's a lot.
10,000 fatted calves, maybe. Maybe that's a better way to understand it. 10,000 fatted calves. How many acres would it take to support that? I mean, I think it's something in the range of 500,000 acres.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah. And, and we don't see that evidence in the land. Now, when we talk about, let's talk about a little bit about the archaeological record. There's some things that we looked at recently on Ancient Days on Cepher Academy concerning the archaeological record. And one concerns this archaeology of all these guys holding purses. Have you guys seen these carvings? There's like these guys in Ecuador that are exactly the same statue as they find in Babylon of a winged creature with an eagle head holding a purse. There are pictures of guys all over from Indonesia, in India, in North America, and so on and so forth. And they're all standing around holding a purse. Well, it's kind of a handbag, if you will. And so what is this thing they're holding, and why is it in all of this archaeology? We also know that there is an archaeological record of pyramids now, for instance, like when you look at the archaeology that is present in the Yucatan Peninsula, where the Mayans are. That's huge. I mean, they have vast cities in that Yucatan Peninsula. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands or even millions of people were living there, but they have a huge pyramid system there. And those pyramids are consistent with pyramids they found all over the world. Pyramids in Russia, pyramids in Yugoslavia, pyramids in Japan, pyramids off the coast of the Bahamas. There's pyramids all over the place. What's with these pyramids? Well, it appears to be an antediluvian architecture. All right. So we know that when we're talking about Abraham's land grant, this is a post-flood land grant. It's after Noah. It's well downstream after Noah. Who were the tribes present in North and South America at the time of Abraham? We don't know. There is some record of an ancient tribe that we're not quite sure who they were, but in New Mexico, Arizona, that preceded by many, many years the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Incas. And this is a very scant record, so there's not a lot to be said about it. But when you talk about the average tribes in America, you've got a group of tribes that came from the Pacific, and you have a group of tribes that came from the Atlantic. And so they were probably not present at the time of Abraham. Now, difficulty with the question here about America being the covenant land of Abraham is that Abraham, there's no record of Abraham getting on any boat. He just merely went south from Mitzrayim. Now, it's possible, and some people have speculated, well, maybe the poles had shifted and it was a different south back then. I mean, that's possible. That's possible. But anyway, we've got this record that we have to deal with. And what I'm saying to you is let's not take for granted the narrative that we've given. I'm not disagreeing with the idea that the situs we currently call Jerusalem is the situs where ultimately Mashiach was executed and where all of the events happened that are described in the New Testament. I'm not disagreeing with that, or even the events that are described in the book of Maccabees. But when you go from Ezra, who was writing around 415 BC, and writing First and Second Chronicles, writing Ezra and Nehemiah, and 3 and 4 Esdras, you leave that. Now you're going to have a 235-year gap before you get to the Maccabees. And that 235-year gap is filled with Greek stuff. Greek. Because Alexander the Great had conquered the whole region and it became Greekified. Now, here's something else to consider while we're talking about this. The story of the Septuagint goes that Ptolemy, who was in Egypt, a Greek king controlling the southern kingdom, desired to have the scriptures written in the Greek language. And so he commissioned the 72 to come and translate pre-existing scripture into the Greek. Now, this happened coincidentally around the same time at least that we assumed the same time, that the record was being created in Qumran with the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Greek record is being written at the same time that the Hebrew record is being written. But where'd they get these? From what scrolls were they copying? Where'd these scrolls come from? And what'd they do with them? Why can't we find any originals? The Dead Sea Scrolls are not originals. The Septuagint is not an original. All of the New Testament scrolls that we see sequestered in the Hagia Sophia were not originals. Where are the originals? Where are the originals and where are the originals? And more importantly, where did they come from? Did these originals come from a different situs in Jerusalem? I mean, there's even a question. I mean, let me give you another reason why I think Babylon is not where we think Babylon is in, okay? Because you have a very interesting thing that is practiced in Judaism. It's called Rosh Hashanah. When is Rosh Hashanah practiced? When do they celebrate the new year? They celebrate the new year at the beginning of the 7th month. Not the first month. So it's the first day of Tishri. Why would you celebrate the new year on the first day of the 7th month instead of the first month when Moshe tells you that the first month is when the barley is in Aviv? And the reason they would celebrate it on a different date is because the barley was in Aviv on a different date. Where is it in the world that the barley is in Aviv in the 7th month instead of in the first month? Answer, in the southern hemisphere, where they have summer when we're having winter. Today in South Africa, it's the first day of summer. So what are you looking at? I'm saying to you that the reason they came back from Babylon practicing a new year that began on the first day of the 7th month is because Babylon was south of the equator. Babylon was south of the equator. And I think that kind of answers why they would do that, not just some arbitrary date. All right. So all of these things add to the question, all right, where are we, right? Okay. So now here's something else when we talk about this second temple being built. Again, the Pacheco family says Zerubbabel had no money to rebuild the temple and only built a fraction of it. In fact, I believe that when you're talking about the fraction of a Pacheco family, he just built the foundation. He laid the foundation because the record, when you go to historians, the historians will tell you, oh yeah, the second temple was rebuilt and completed in 417 BC. That's a lot different than when the life of Zerubbabel was. Why was it 417 BC? Why was it so late? The reason why it was so late is because it took them years to finish the temple. And they did not build Herod's temple. They built some small thing that they thought was a replica of Solomon's temple. And when they built the temple and they got it done, it's recorded in 3 Esdras chapter 8 as to when that happened. Now, historians, particularly British historians, have looked at this number and have used 3 Esdras for years to determine when the second temple was constructed. And because it gives a date of Darius's reign, they know which Darius they're talking about, and it was in 417 BC. Now, 417 BC answers a lot of questions. Let me give you an example. Here, let's have some fun here now. For those of you that are in my academy classes, you'll know the fun we're about to have, which is what? Whiteboard. Okay, let's go to whiteboard. Okay, so here we are on the whiteboard. Now, take a look at this for a second, because what we see here is that if you have, let's take some dates, okay? So we've got a prophecy in Daniel 9, and Daniel 9 says, okay, 62 weeks and 7 weeks. And 7 weeks. Now, people come and look at this prophecy, and the average American goes, well, 62 and 7 is 69. Therefore, Daniel 9:25 is talking about 69 weeks. No. Isaac Newton had this figured out back in the 1600s. This is one prophecy. This is the other prophecy. Okay? It's two separate prophecies. It's not one prophecy. And so this is why you get carried away with this Daniel 70th week stuff. But just hold on here a minute. Let's take a look here. Just 1 second. We'll get into Daniel and take a look and see what we have to say here. So Daniel 9:25 reads that no one understand that from the going forth of the word to return and build Jerusalem. Okay, so the big question is, when did that word happen? All right. So you have, okay, when did the word happen that to go and rebuild Jerusalem? Well, let's see, that was the Edict of Cyrus. Well, no, it wasn't, because that was in the 500s. And if that was in and let's take a look at 62 weeks times 7, right? 62 weeks times 7 is going to be 434 days. 434 days. All right. Now that means that if the Mashiach is going to come, he has to come 434 years, a day being equal to a year, 434 years after the edict is given. Okay, so that had to be Cyrus. Well, no, if it was Cyrus, that puts the Mashiach coming when? When's that put the Mashiach coming? Oh, somewhere in the 1st century BC. Second century BC. What about if it was Artaxerxes' decree? Same thing. The date never adds up. Tobias Singer has proved this continuously. It never adds up. It never works. Okay. However, look at this. If we take the 634 or the 434 days and we say, okay, the second temple was completed in 417. Second temple completed in 417 BC. All right. Now, who gave the edict to go, who gave the word to return and build Jerusalem? Who did that? It was the Jews. Why? Hey, the temple's been, look, think about if there was a third temple built right now. If there was a third temple built right now, would there be a call to worldwide Jewry? Hey, the temple's built, we can sacrifice again. There would, wouldn't there? It'd be a huge call. We got our temple back. Let's return. Everybody come back to Jerusalem. Our temple is back. And this is exactly what happened here. The decree was not given by Cyrus. It wasn't given by Xerxes. It wasn't given by Artaxerxes. It was given by the Jews who finished the temple. All right, now let's take a look at 417 and let's subtract it from 434, and it takes us to the year 17 AD. Now, read the prophecy again. No one understand that from the going forth of the word to return and build Jerusalem until Mashiach the Prince is 7 weeks, that's one prophecy, and the second prophecy, 62 weeks, returning to diligently build the wide streets in times of distress. All right, so does Mashiach come in AD 17? All right, well, let's continue. So Herod the Great, you recall Herod the Great, he was the guy that got upset when the Magi showed up. And the Magi showed up and said, hey, we're looking for the king that was just born. You know, the king of this area that was just born. Could you point him out to us? What king? I'm going to go smash his head in with a sledgehammer. I'm the king. What king are you talking about? Where is he? What are you talking about? We'll let you know if we find him. So when did this happen? Well, Herod the Great died in 3 BC. This is always a huge problem for commentators who want to say that Mashiach was born in the year 1. That's a big problem because the Gospels record that Herod the Great was alive when he was born. And in fact, the historical record says Herod died after the lunar eclipse in 3 BC. Okay, well, guess what? There were 2 lunar eclipses in 3 BC. One was on the first day of Matzah, and the other was on the first day of Sukkot. And guess what? They were blood moons. And these 2 are exactly 6 months apart. So, who was born here? John the Baptist. Who was born here? Mashiach. Now, Herod dies after this lunar eclipse. Okay, so we've got some pretty hard evidence that Mashiach was born on the first day of Tabernacles in 3 BC. All right. Now, if that's the case, if he was born on the first day of Tabernacles in 3 BC, let's see if we can figure this out. So he was born on the first day of Tabernacles in 3 BC. So when did he turn 20 years old? When you can count him as a male. When was that? Sherry?
17 AD.
AD 17, Mashiach becomes a man. Suddenly that prophecy is realized, isn't it? You see that? So these are the kinds of things that we begin to see that give us a different realization about what takes place. And I'm not going to get into the rest of the prophecy here, but I wanted to share that with you so that you could see that when we're talking about this idea of Mashiach, and we're talking about this idea of his prophecy, it's very, very clear that we do have a realization, but we have to be very careful about how we read the scripture. Okay. All right. Let me go back here and see how we're doing with our chat here going on here. All right. Now here's somebody says, Curtis Walter says, the best part is that this new temple is built without hands and comes down from heaven. Well, the new temple was built. Remember what Mashiach said. You can tear this temple down and I will rebuild it in 3 days. Took us 46 years to build this temple. Now, is that accurate? Took us 46 years to build this temple. That tells you that first of all, if they were able to tell you that it took 46 years to build the temple, if you go back and look at the scriptural record, Zerubbabel coming in there sometime around 523 BC, and the temple not being finished until 417, that looks to me more like about 100 and something years. What temple they talking about? They're talking about Herod's temple. And they're talking about a commissioning that was done by somebody that said, let's build a new temple. And that somebody was probably the Hasmonean kingdom. The Hasmonean kings commissioned the building of the temple. Mashiach says, tear that temple down, I'll rebuild it in 3 days. Did he rebuild the third temple? Yes, he is the third temple. There is no other temple. He is the third temple. There is no other temple. There isn't going to be another temple. He is the third temple. Okay. Now, Greg Olson says, modern Jerusalem is at the center of the old world. Well, that may be true, but the zero longitude goes through London. And the equator is south of that. So how do we call that the center of the world? All right. Okay. Now, another question. Rob Glow asks, did Yahweh destroy the Garden of Eden, or does it still exist? Well, that's a big question. Now, there's a very good chance that the Garden of Eden operated in a different dimension. So it's probably still here, but the angel with the sword is an angel that blocks dimensionally, and that's why you can't see it, and that's why it can't be found. Okay. Now, Amanda asked, when did Herod send out the order to eliminate the 2-year-old males? Well, it was shortly after that. He didn't. A lot of people get this myth wrong. They're like, oh, okay, the Magi showed up 2 years later. No, the Magi showed up the following morning. The Magi showed up the following morning. You got to remember, Mary gives birth to a male. She's unclean for 7 days. The Magi show up the following morning, and they're like, what are you doing here? Oh, we know that the king was born because we saw it in the heavens. We saw it in the skies. We saw the star over Bethlehem. We know this is the place. We know this is exactly the time. We know all of this. Where's the baby? Well, here's the baby, but what are you doing here? I'm in my 7 days of uncleanness. Well, we brought some gifts, right? And they brought them enough gifts to allow them to escape Herod and go to Egypt. They had enough money to go to Egypt and hang out for quite a while. So what you see there is that Herod imposed that immediately thereafter. He didn't wait 2 years to do that. He imposed that edict immediately thereafter. Go over there and kill all the babies under 2 years old. Why? Because he wanted to kill all the babies that were under 2 years old. And he wanted to make sure that in case the Magi were wrong by a year or so, and the baby was born last year, or even a year and a half ago, that he wasn't going to miss him. This king wasn't going to be left out. He was going to find him. Okay. All right. Okay. Now, Jason says the Garden of Eden is in the United States of America. I mean, this could be possible. I mean, it's possible that this was the case. I mean, again, a lot of this is, I can't justify where the Garden of Eden is. All I can tell you is that Adam was put to the east of Eden. All right. Now, so going through this, now let's go back and talk about where we are in modernity, because all of these things reflect on modernity. They reflect on what's going on in Israel right now. Now, this Muslim imam who was teaching, he said, look, let's take a look at the very scriptures upon which Judaism is built, the Tanakh, the Talmud. The Tanakh and the Talmud make it very clear, Jeremiah 3, that the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes, were divorced. They were handed a certificate of divorce. And by the way, that certificate of divorce in the Greek is called an apostasion. Just like apostasy, apostasy talking about in 2 Thessalonians 2, the apostasion is the certificate of divorce. So when Paul says the church is going to fall away, the church is going to divorce itself. People are going to divorce themselves from Yah. That's what the apostasy means. And so we see that Yah gives a certificate of divorce to the northern kingdom, says, you're out. And have you seen what your sister Judah is doing? She's twice the harlot you are. Now, if people think that Yah has not separated himself from them, why is the temple gone? Why were they kicked out of the Holy Land for 2,000 years? Why? Why did that happen? Because Yah wasn't going to tolerate it anymore, okay? So the fact is that, and this is the point this imam was making, and it's a good point. It's very clear in the Tanakh, in the Talmud, very, very clear that the house of Judah routinely killed the prophets. The house of Judah routinely exalted idols. The house of Judah continually brought up Ishtar and Astarte and Baal, and they ran after every other idol they could think of. They passed their children through the fire, and the idolatry became so excessive that their kingdom was destroyed. They were removed from the throne of their kingdom, and it was never reinstated. So you have to understand that with the destruction of the first temple in 586 BC, the kingdom of Yahud came to an end. There is no political Yahudi thereafter. It was done. Even the kingdom of the Maccabees was called the Hasmonean kingdom, not the kingdom of Judea renewed. Okay? Very important point. So when you look at this Muslim was saying, how do you figure that you're the chosen people and that you have a right to the chosen land? And again, the Tanakh says in 1 Chronicles 5:1, Devri Hayamim Rishon, chapter 5, verse 1, the birthright was not given to Judah. This is just the truth of it. The birthright was not given to Judah. The birthright was to be given to Reuben. But it did not go to Reuben because Reuben had gone up to his father's couch It went to Joseph. What is the birthright? The birthright, the covenant that was made with Abraham, is that Abraham would be the father of many nations, and his seed would be numerous, more numerous than the sand of the sea, and he would be given the Holy Land. That became an oath to Yitzhak, which became a law unto Yaakov. The words in Hebrew are covenant brit to Adam, an oath sheva to Yitzhak, a chok, a law to Yaakov, and an everlasting covenant, brit olam, to the children of Yasharel. And of that birthright, it in particular was given from Yasharel to Yosef and his sons Ephraim and Manasseh. This is what the Jewish literature says, not what some Muslim imam says, or not what some Christian church says. This is what is written in the Tanakh. Are they the chosen people? No. Do they have a right to the land? No. Is the land the Holy Land? Question. Question. That's a question. Is the Temple Mount the situs of the temple? Question. Shouldn't we have that question answered before we start killing people willy-nilly? I think so.
We will have that question answered when all the armies surround, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's another question too, right? That's another question. And you have to remember, I think we have to distinguish from the idea of man-made Armageddon
Right.
and Yah's delivery of Armageddon. I think those are two different worlds. And what I mean by that is you can see, for instance, there's a lot of discussion in Islam about the Shia trying to push world events to force the Mahdi, the 12th Imam, to appear. If we do this, we do that, we do that, then all these timings come together and he has to appear. There's a lot of that in the Christian world too. There's a lot of that in the Jewish world. Let's push an antichrist out here. Let's try to realize all of the prophecies in Revelation so that we can force Mashiach to get here. There isn't going to be any forcing Yah to do a single thing. You're not going to force it. Even though it's written, the kingdom of heaven is taken by violence, right? That nonetheless, you're not going to force Mashiach to come here and do some kind of Armageddon. So there is a lot of falseness going on right now as mankind is pushing towards an Armageddon, wanting to achieve these kinds of ends. But I have to tell you, there, on one hand, we can say, okay, it looks like that's being pushed towards that. But on the other hand, it's actually happening too. And nothing happens outside the scope and the will of Yah. So this is another problem. This is something else that we have going on. That's a bit of an issue. Okay. Now, again, we have to talk about this too. Now, Rick Baker says, Ron Wyatt found the Ark of the Covenant. When these newly trained priests tried to retrieve it, their eyes were burned out and they died. The state of Israel had to contact Ron Wyatt to retrieve them. Okay, that's an interesting commentary there, Rick. I'd like to see a little bit more on that. The kind of data. That's the first I've ever heard of that narrative. Okay. All right. So, and again, a lot of this stuff is, we've had a lot of stories that are downstream, right? Like, for instance, when I see the problem between Matthew 1 and Luke 3, I get a lot of diatribe from people justifying the fact that the two contradict one another by saying, well, what they really meant here was, when they said Joseph, the supposed father of Mashiach, they were really talking about Mary. Really? And, so we hear a lot of diatribe. I heard somebody saying that the true pronunciation of the Yod He Vav He is Jesus. Well, okay, let's push it, right? But people can make all kinds of extrapolations if they so desire. But you have the hard record inside of the scriptures, and inside the scriptures, they tell you particular things. And you have to ask yourself the question, Okay, is where the sinuses were being told right now, is that true? Is that true? Okay. Okay, so Cynthia says we can expedite the return of Yahusha. It's in 1 or 2 Peter. Yeah, Maranatha, right? Maranatha. Okay. All right. So okay, let's see. All right. So Ron Wyatt has come to the surface now as a topic. Ron Wyatt's come to the surface as a topic. Interesting. Interesting. Now, I mean, I can tell you, like, for instance, one of the things that Ron talks about, he talked about the crossing of the Gulf of Aqaba. And he said, this is where Moshe crossed the Red Sea at the Gulf of Aqaba. Okay. Now, I can tell you that there are many, many maps from the 1500s of Africa and that region that do not show the Gulf of Aqaba at all. It doesn't appear on the maps. So the Gulf of Aqaba may be a later thing that has happened as a result of continental shift. So that's going to be kind of an interesting problem. Furthermore, the scripture, guess what, does not say Red Sea. It says Reed Sea. Yam Soph. Reed Sea, not Red Sea. Okay. All right. So let's take some commentary here from people who are in the Zoom. All right. Let's take some stuff. Robbie, did you want to add some commentary here today? If you do, you got to show your face. That's one of the rules in the Zoom meeting. I guess that means no. How about you, Rebecca? Are you here? I'm not getting near that. I'm not getting near that. I think that's what she said. Sherry, give us some feedback. Oh, there she goes. There's Rebecca.
I am here, but I'm in the middle of cooking and I'm listening to you. But I did follow Ron Wyatt and all the stuff he was saying about all of that. It's been a couple of years now, I think, since all that was happening, right?
Right.
So that's about all I have to say right at the moment. I just love listening to what you have to say.
Well, Ron has put together some very interesting videos, and he has very emotional testimony. And his emotional testimony, Robbie, did you want to kick in on this?
I don't know how to use Zoom. So I don't know how to show my face. I'm not sure what to do. I'm new to this.
Okay,
I don't know if you can hear me.
Look down in the left-hand corner and you'll see a thing that says mute and then stop video. Do you see those two elements?
Left-hand corner.
The left-hand corner, do you see them there?
Meeting information, recording live, custom live stream service. Is that it? No.
Okay.
Oh, mute down the bottom.
Yeah, you see the mute and then you see the little camera. The camera should have a line through it. It's got a line through it.
Yep.
Okay, now just click on it and then presto. See, now you're starting to appear. There you are. Boom.
Oh, okay.
Okay, now, from whence do you hail? Where are you?
I'm in Australia. I'm in far north Queensland, Australia.
Okay.
Where we had the cyclones and everything. So
yeah. And you're going in the summer, correct?
Yes. Yeah. It's,
okay, let me ask you the critical question that I ask everybody from Australia. Do the toilets flush the opposite way?
I wouldn't have a clue. My parents lived on Nauru Island, so they were right on the equator. So yeah, I just had someone coming in. I just had to be quiet for a second. So I wouldn't really know.
Okay, all right. But you are going into summer now, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's quite well. We're right in summer actually, so it's getting quite hot here in places, but it's been quite cold here because of the low pressure and all the rain and everything that we had. But yeah, you've raised some interesting questions, about Ron Wyatt's teachings. I've watched quite a few of his videos and all the chariot wheels. I don't know. And the columns that were put up there, there is some evidence.
Yeah, right.
But I don't know.
Yeah, and I saw the evidence at Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, which of course is now fenced off, tourists not allowed, don't go there kind of thing.
Mm.
And pretty convincing stuff. You had 12 columns and they were of different sizes. The top of the mountain appears to be burned. Mount Horeb appears to have been split with water, that water may have gushed out of it. All of these things are interesting tidbits of evidence, right? And
Raised an interesting point. And how could that area sustain all those cattle, all those animals?
yeah, not just the people, but all of
That's
those
right.
animals, right? And so you had a huge amount. And of course, the whole idea was we're going out. When you look at the fact that the Torah says, go ahead, Rebecca.
Oh, wait, you're asking me again? Hang on a second.
Okay, I was just, I'm not going to put you on the spot.
I'm sorry, I forgot to put myself on mute.
Okay, but Robbie, when you talk about this, you look at the Torah. The Torah says they sacrificed a lamb morning, noon, and night. That's 3 a day. Okay, so 3 a day, that's 1,000 a year. And they did it for 40 years. So they must have had 40,000 sheep over a period of 40 years that they were able to sacrifice, right? And not to mention the bulls that they would slaughter. You have to slaughter a bull for this. You have to slaughter a bull for that. You have to take a goat and slaughter him for this. On and on and on and on. Plus they had camels. Plus they had these other things. And where were these animals drinking?
Exactly.
And so these, I think, the pragmatic aspects of the scripture require a question. Now, if you take a look and you see that Abraham went south from Mitzrayim, that's what it says in Genesis 13:1. He went south. Then if he went south, he probably went south along the Nile River. So if Moshe was moving 2.5 million people and 2.5 million cattle and all of their flocks southward, and he moved them along the Nile River, does the Nile have enough water to supply that kind of population? Answer is yes. The Nile currently moves 79 billion cubic feet of water a day. It's the largest river in the world, runs all the way, and it runs all the way to Lake Victoria and beyond if you were to calculate the Zambezi going off the other side, right? And so as a consequence, you're seeing the longest river in the world and certainly a river that's moving a ton of water. So it would be sufficient for these millions of people to just kind of crawl along the Nile as they camped, being able to water their animals at will, right?
Yeah.
And who knows how far they were spread out. But you compared that to, gee, we're alongside the Red Sea, which is a saltwater place. Can your animals can't drink out of salt water, right? Now, it's possible that Saudi Arabia was well fed with water at that time. It's possible that was green, that was a lush area. Maybe all of Iraq was jungle during that time. I mean, I don't know. We don't know. It's possible that could be true. If Lebanon, for instance, when you talk about the cedars of Lebanon, and Lebanon, by the way, means white mountains, right? The place of white mountains. Remember Laban, the father of Raquel and Leah, Laban. If he was in Australia, his last name would have been White, right? Go look up Whitey. He's got a couple of daughters. He lives up on Wolverton Mountain. See if you can get married up there, right? But the Lebanon is white mountains, right? And so white mountains, now that could mean white in terms of like the Dolomites or something like this that are white mountains, or it could mean snow-capped mountains. But either way, when you're talking about the cedars of Lebanon, these were huge, huge trees. These were like redwood trees out of California, possibly bigger than the redwoods in California. Now, if there were huge parcels of cedar trees along in what is now modern day Lebanon and Syria, that would have caused a shift in the ecosystem, which would have drawn water and rainfall and so on and so forth into that region, which could have made that whole area not a parched desert, but rather very arable, possibly even jungle. And if that were the case, you can see what would happen from clear cutting that. Oh, those logs are good. Let's just cut them all down. They cut them all down. Then next thing you know, you're living in desert.
That's happening in Australia.
There was also the miracle where the rock was split. and water flowed.
Right, right.
Mm.
Yeah, and Horeb in Saudi Arabia, that particular situs gives evidence of that. That gives evidence of that. It looks like there's a huge stone there, and it also looks like massive amounts of water were pouring over the top of that stone down into something else. And okay, so this is why I mean, we don't have the answers. We don't know because, of course, the past is so distant in the past. We're talking 3,500 years ago, that there could have been remarkable changes on Earth. Like, I'll give you another example. They know now, most scientists are willing to admit, that the ancient maps of Africa, none of which really precede 1500 AD, those maps of Africa show a green northern Africa with two major lakes, major rivers running through it, and arable land. It didn't become desert until the 1600s. So that's a pretty recent change, right? So what was it? If we could go from an arable land in 1500 to complete desert in 1600, untransmutable of desert, then what was the condition 400 years before that? And 400 years before that, what was the condition? Could be radically different. Some of the ancient maps show a huge lake in the Congo, huge lake, something the size of Lake Superior, doesn't exist anymore. It's completely gone. But on the same hand, we know that when I was a kid, one of the largest lakes in the world was called the Aral Sea. You guys might remember this. You would look at a map of the Soviet Union and you would see the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, and then the Aral Sea, Aral. That sea is completely gone. It's totally 100% gone. There's not a drop of water there at all. There's some boats laying on the sand. That's it. There's no sea there anymore. That's happened in our lifetime.
You know, another thing you got to think about is they say that the Grand Canyon was cut because of water erosion, right? Well, how come the Nile that's been from the beginning of time hasn't cut a deep canyon?
Very good point. I mean, we've had record of that river since the very beginning in the book of Genesis. We have record of that river. So why hasn't it cut a large canyon? Now,
right, and we see Africa right now splitting.
Yeah, although I got to tell you, when we talk about that idea of the continental shift in Africa that's supposedly taking place, we don't see a huge record of earthquakes taking place there. Now, when we talk about shift, if you go look at Antioch, Turkey, and you go up that ravine, there's clear shift going on there. That Turkey looks like it is splitting away from the Middle East. And we've had plenty of earthquake history along that continental divide to give evidence of that. Where I live, there's plenty of evidence that it looks like Alaska is going to split right now, right? Starting to move out into a different range. And with that starting, and that's not starting to happen. I mean, we get, 1,000 earthquakes a month. Would give evidence to that. But when you look at this so-called continental split in Africa, where are all the earthquakes? And there's ancient maps that along that continental split that we see there, there's ancient maps that show a river that comes through Eritrea, through Ethiopia, through Uganda, through Tanzania, all the way down to the southern coast. Is this the River Gihon that compasses the whole land of Kush? You see? And I mean, so all of these things these become questions, the practical questions of Scripture. And so this is part of the reason I wanted to kind of raise this issue. And this is kind of what's been pressing at me for quite some time now. It's been about a year that it's been pressing on me about what the situation is, what the true nature of the Old Testament is. Now, there's something else that I want to raise while we're talking about this too, which is this issue of the House of Zerach. Now, the House of Zerach, there's been some very good recordings on this, people who've looked into it and have explored its historicity. And when you look at the House of Zerach, once again, we see this idea, gee, he's got the red ribbon around his wrist. he is the scapegoat, and he's treated like the scapegoat in Scripture. When they reference his children in First Kings, I think it's First Kings 5, they identify his children as the sons of Mahol. They don't even identify him as these children being his sons. These are the sons of Mahol, which means really round dancing. Why couldn't they say they were the sons of Zerach? Ezra is the one who has to clarify it and says these are the sons of Zerach. Why didn't they say that? Because they were scapegoating Zerach. And you can tell the only son of Zerach that remains in the Exodus is Zimri, and it's his grandson or great-grandson or whoever it was, but it was in that line, is the one who stole the silver and the gold and took all the stuff and buried him in the floor of his tent when they attacked Jericho. So they blame the curse that came on Israel on a son of Zerach, right? The scapegoat. He becomes the scapegoat again. And this business of scapegoating Zerach, I think, is a major question. And it not only becomes a major question in terms of the kingship, because remember, Zerach is the son of Judah, the firstborn of Judah, the rightful heir to Judah, the primogenitor of Judah. And so when you see the promise given in Genesis 49, you will have a scepter in your hands and a lawgiver between your feet till Shiloh come. Two questions. One is, who had that scepter in his hand and the lawgiver between his feet? Was it the line of Pharez, who would be kicked out of Jerusalem after 14 generations? Or was it the line of Zerach? And what does it mean when Shiloh come? Does that mean when Mashiach makes his first appearance? Or does that mean when the kingdom is on earth? These are questions. Now, when you look at this narrative now as to Zerach, and this is what I've been finding in the research. We did a lot of research in the UK this last trip. And what I found in Ireland was absolutely unbelievable. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to whiteboard for just one more second. I want to show you something. What we found something very interesting there's a set of megalithic mounds that were discovered in 1699 up near the Boyne River. The Boyne River is where the Battle of Boyne was fought, which was the Glorious Revolution in England. It's called the Glorious Revolution. And anyway, there are 3 mounds that they found up there, okay? And so you've got like a mound here, and then you got a mound over here, and then you got a mound over here, okay? Now this mound here is called New Grange. New Grange. This mound, of course, is going to have a big crowd there tonight because this mound has a cavern in it that goes back 40 feet that becomes completely illuminated at the dawn of the winter solstice. So there are people who draw lotto tickets to be able to get inside this cavern because it lights up and has lit up like this. They estimate this as being from around 4500 BC. Now, I don't accept that time dating, but this is where they're saying these mounds come from, 4500 BC. Okay, so this lights up on the winter solstice. So this is a solstice mound. And it's called New Grange. And the interesting thing about this is that, of course, it's been improved to make it a tourist trap and all this other stuff. It is a UNESCO site, but it's been improved and all this other stuff. But the original mound itself, around this circle here, there are exactly 52 huge stones constituting the circular base. What does that number tell you?
It's calendar.
Yeah. And what's 52, Sherry?
Weeks, 52 weeks.
52 weeks. So they're saying that from solstice to solstice, there are 52 weeks. Now, when you get over here, this is the mound called Nauth. This is called Nauth. And this one is called Douth. Now, this mound here has chambers on this side and this side. This one illuminates for the vernal equinox, and this one illuminates for the autumnal equinox. And they had a stone here. They had two stones that were significant. They had one stone that had this on it. What is that?
7 days.
Exactly. It's 7 nights and 7 days. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I saw that, and the gal was saying, "Oh, we think that was a geography describing the river." Or she literally said, the archaeologist literally said this, or maybe they were taking mushrooms. The archaeologist said this. It's like, come on, you really calling that some kind of science? You know? And I took one look at it and immediately knew what it was, because I don't know how many times I've tried to describe to people that the day ends when the sun sets here and it begins right here at night. This is why you kind of showed this is like night, and then, oh, okay, here's the sunrise, and it's going to go up to the sunset again, and this constitutes one day, right? And I don't know how many times I've drawn that map to try to explain this to people. So I immediately recognized it as setting this forth. Now, if this is also 4,500 BC, let's reach the conclusion that is obvious at its face. What can we determine from these two megalithic mounds? That they recognized a 7-day week. They recognized a 7-day week and a 52-week year. That's pretty clear, isn't it? You can see this in the megalithic structure. So when people come to me and they say, well, what about the lunar Sabbath? You know, the 7-day week was created by the Gregorian calendar. Yeah, I've got proof right here that the 7-day week was observed from time out of mind. From time out of mind, they observed the 7-day week. Here's proof. Now, go check out the megalith yourself, and you can see it. They also have another mound that has one that's got 30 of these and 29 and a half circles, signifying what? A 30-day month, but different than a 29.5-day lunar month. All of this is on these mounds, okay? So when we start talking about the calendar, when we start having these arguments over the Sabbath, people say, well, look, you've got the new moon, and then you count 7 from there, and that's the Sabbath. It could be a Tuesday, it could be a Thursday, it could be a whatever. And then you keep doing that until you get to the end of the month, and then you wait until the new moon. Well, that waiting until the new moon can be 8 days, can be 9 days, and in a rare occasion, 10 days. How is that the 7th-day Sabbath? All right, let's go back to the whiteboard one more time, and I'm going to show you this, because when we talk, well, I don't have to share this with you. When we talk about the word Sabbath, we use the word Shabbat. Why do we use the word Shabbat? Because the ate at the end is a feminine plural. Just like, for instance, when you talk about Elohim, Elohim is a masculine plural. Ruachot is a feminine plural. Ruach singular, Ruachot feminine. Shabbat is a plural. So when he says keep my Shabbat, he's saying keep my Sabbaths with an S, plural, because the singular is the word Shabbat, which means what? 7. Hello, 7. The word Sabbath means 7. If you were to translate it explicitly into English, it would be keep my 7s. There's nothing about keeping my 8s and nothing about keeping my 9s. Keep my 7s, my Shabbat, right? So that kind of like, yeah, okay, the lunar Sabbath becomes a bit of an issue of contention under those kinds of ideas. All right. Now, when we talk about, I'm going to go back and talk a little bit about the calendar too. When we talk about this various set of calendars, the 364-day calendar given to us in Enoch and Jubilees, the 360-day calendar given to us in Genesis and in the book of Daniel. And then we have the calendar that naturally appears, which is a 13th month calendar, where it has an intercalary year. Now, we have hard evidence that the intercalary month was practiced in Central Europe for over 1,500 years. They have an artifact that's called the Coligny calendar that was found in France that shows a calendar that factored in for an intercalary month. So who were the people practicing this intercalary month and with a 13th month every 2 or 3 years? Well, they were the Celtic people. They were the Gaelic people. And both of those tribes came out of the Holy Land at some point. Okay, so in the Yom Kodesh, I deal with all of these different calendars. Now I'm going to show you one form of calendar where we will use the whiteboard. This is a absolutely shocking calendar because it goes and reflects the sevenfold doctrine of his whole creation. So if you take the holy month and you say, okay, let's do the holy month. So the holy month is going to have, the new moon here, and then we're going to go out to the 8th day here. And then we're going to go out to the 15th day here in patterns of 7 now. And this is matzah, okay? And then we go out to the 22nd here. That's the end of that 7-day period. Excuse me, the 20th, the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd. Then the 23rd is going to be called, this is going to be first fruits or bikur, right? This is the wave offering. So here's the wave offering here. Now this would be the first Shabbat in the count that goes out to counting Shavuot. But now look at this. So we have, wait a minute, let me clear this up real quick. We have, and that's the 23rd, pardon me. The 23rd, we've got 23 days in the first month. Now, from here on out, if we go 7 sevens, we go 7 sevens, so we have a 49-day month here. The 50th day, which is the first of the next month, and we go 49 days with this 50-day count. The 50th day, which is the first month of the next month, we go 49. Anyway, by the time we do 49, 7 times 5, 6, 7, and we add it to the 23-day calendar, we get 365 days. Now, this is one form of reckoning, holy month, followed by 7 Shavuot schema, a sevenfold doctrine of his whole creation, if you will. Has anybody given us this calendar in scripture? No. Therefore, we're only going to mention it as a sidebar. We'll mention it as a sidebar. Okay. Go ahead,
Can
Sherry.
I say something? Okay, in Jubilees 2, verse 9, it says, "And on the 4th day he created the sun and the moon and the stars, and set them in the expanse of the heaven to give light upon the earth and to rule over the day and the night and to divide the light from the darkness. And Elohim appointed the sun to be a great sign on the earth for days and for Sabbaths and for months and for feasts and for years and for Sabbaths of years and for jubilees and for all seasons of the year." So he appointed the sun to be the great sign on the earth for the days and for Sabbaths, not the moon.
Yeah, a very interesting point. The sun, not the moon. And when you talk about the sun, now this, again, this is something that is worthy of illustration. because, and I've taught on this before, and I know you've heard it, Sherry, many times, but I'm gonna reckon it again. Because remember that we've got some symbols that show up that are indicative of things. For instance, if you have this kind of a symbol here, the sickle moon, what would you expect the calendar to be? Lunar. Is Islam under a lunar calendar? Yes, they are. All right, now what about this? If I want to draw a solar calendar that is predicated on solstice, equinox, I'm going to give you an equilateral cross. That is specifically a solar calendar and nothing but a solar calendar. Now, equally, you can carry this out a little bit further, and you can do this and create the star of Remphan, which is the star that appears on top of everybody's Christmas tree. This, in addition to signaling the solstice and the equinoxes, also gives you the high occultic festivals, of, Beltane and Samhain and all of those, right? Halloween, May Day, that kind of thing. All of this comes off this symbol here, the solar symbol. But the scriptural calendar says, okay, look, we're going to use the sun primarily for days, right? The sun gives us days. Now, I want to say this too, and I'm going to try to get to this real quickly, and then we'll kind of move on from this. But if you look at the 4 pillars of the earth, these are metaphysical pillars, not physical pillars. They're metaphysical pillars. Well, they aren't physical in respect, but they're metaphysical pillars. And these metaphysical pillars are what? You shall use the sun, the moon, the sun, that's spelled with an N, no M. Anybody would know that. The sun, moon, and the stars also. For what? What's it say? Signs, seasons, days, years. Right? That's what it says, right? Okay, so what's the year? The year is the orbit of the earth around the sun. That's a year. 1 year beginning. The circuit, not the circle of the earth, the circuit of the earth is 1 year. What about days? Days are the revolution of the earth in respect of the what? Sun. These are all sun dependent. What about the seasons? The seasons is the tilt of the earth. This is why it's summer in Australia and hot, and it's cold in Alaska and dark, cold and dark and snowy. Did I mention these things? And then finally, the signs are, this is the only thing that is moon related. This is also sun related, our relationship to the sun and how we're tilted. And then the moon is for the signs. And the moon is for the sign of where we find the new moon. Which is Psalm 81:3. So this is what I think. Now, I know there's going to be lots of disagreement on this video, but this is what I think are the 4 pillars of the earth. The 4 pillars of the earth are the signs, seasons, days, and years given to us in Genesis 1:14. And those are predicated upon the moon, giving us a new moon, the moon cycle, the Chodesh, the moon cycle. The seasons, dependent upon the tilt of the earth. The days, depending on the revolution of the earth. And the years, depending on the orbit of the earth. These are the 4 pillars of the earth. They're metaphysical, if you will. They're physical in terms of their properties, but they're metaphysical in terms of their understanding. And so because of this, we can kind of see that we would get signs, seasons, days, and years. Now, a person who is aware of the natural calendar knows, for instance, that you can tell the day of the month by using the moon. Moon, chodesh, is the word that is translated for month throughout Scripture. Chodesh has routinely been translated as month. Because the word for moon is yiryak, not chodesh. Chodesh means renewed cycle. It means renewed cycle. And so when we look at these kinds of things to understand these cycles, we need to know that the moon has a waxing and waning. And so the moon waxes from a dark moon to a full moon and wanes back to a dark moon. We don't get a new moon. There's not, that moon doesn't blow up at the end of the month and then somebody imports in some other rock from Jupiter that says, here's our moon this month. It's the same moon month after month after month, renewing its cycle. So it's not completely new. It's a renewed moon. It's a chodesh. It's a chodesh moon, a renewed moon. And similarly, we have this with the idea of the tilt on the earth. We can see that this tilt, which is a fixed tilt, gives us this contrast such that we would have a heated summer in Australia because that portion of the earth is closer to the sun, and a cold Alaska in the winter on the very same date because we're farther away from the sun. Now, when we get to the equinox, we're both going to be pretty much at the same distance from the sun, whether it's the vernal equinox or the autumnal equinox. And so we probably should have the same temperatures, or pretty close to the same temperatures, same kind of climate around the equinox. Okay. So really because the moon is part of these signs, we can see that we have the sun, moon, and the stars are to be given for these things. Now, what about the stars? Do the stars contribute to the seasons? And the answer is yes, they do. Because with the constellations in the heavens, and I know there's been a lot of research over at the Ark concerning these constellations in cosmology, but you have constellations that go above and below the event horizon, signifying seasons. One of those constellations that disappears below the event horizon during the winter, at least in the northern hemisphere, is Virgo. Virgo disappears below the event horizon for the whole winter. And Virgo then reappears above the event horizon at the vernal equinox. And Spica, which is the left hand of Virgo, is traditionally marked as holding a sheaf of barley. So when the barley is in Aviv is also a comment talking about when Spica, the star, rises above the event horizon. So when Spica rises above the event horizon, the barley is in Aviv, signaling the first month. Now you can imagine if you were in the southern hemisphere, Spica is going to come below the event horizon on the 7th month of the year, which is going to be the first month of the planting season in the southern hemisphere. So Spica is in Aviv in September in the southern hemisphere. Now, additionally, Orion does a similar kind of disappearing act, moving back and forth over the event horizon, right? And so these constellations are and can be used for signs, seasons, days, and years. And even more importantly, if you're up here in the northern country where I am, and I don't know how it works in the south, maybe the Southern Cross. Robbie, can you see the Southern Cross where you are?
Yes, I can see the Southern Cross from where I am. I'm in North Queensland, but can still see the Southern Cross.
Yeah.
We've got a big thunderstorm here, so things might drop out.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, it's heavy
guys
rain, and I had to race off and shut all windows.
You get some wild weather down there, I'll tell you.
Yeah, I think by design. Our whole region's been cut off with transport roads and everything. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but we're all well prepped.
Yeah, well, it's Australia is a very interesting place. You got to be pretty tough to live there in Australia. You got to be willing to do the outback. I mean, I think Australia is more deadly than Alaska. everything moving down there can kill you.
Yeah, well, I caught a snake the other night, so trying to get my jokes.
So we had something for the salad.
All the men took off, so I had to pick it up.
Well, it's good to have a witness from the Southern Hemisphere to give us some testimony tonight, because I think
Oh, there's
things
a
are
few of
important.
us.
Yeah, it's important to see and important to hear. And, so I think we've kind of covered what I wanted to cover tonight. We talked a little bit about some of the contentious issues. Now, I do want to go through, if you guys don't mind, I do want to go through kind of current events politically. I know Debbie asked about this earlier, and I want to deal with some of what she talked about, because we have some very critical things, and I want to kind of advise our group, our people, as to what's happening. Now, I can tell you that 2024 is going to be one of the most difficult years in American history. That may not be so difficult for the rest of the Western world, but in the United States, it's going to be a very, very difficult time. There is no rescuer that's going to come to save the day. There is no bailout that's going to take place. There is nothing, none of these things are going to happen. You have many destructive forces that have applied themselves against the U.S., and they are planning on putting a final nail in the coffin this year. And so we see that the strong likelihood of the dollar losing all of its value this year is very high. Hyperinflation, the fact that hyperinflation is going to go through the roof. We have a deficit of about 34 trillion right now. 27 trillion of that $34 trillion deficit was spent since the housing crash in 2008. Nothing has been fixed since 2008. So we have this huge deficit, and the deficit is going to absolutely balloon next year. I mean, you're going to see $1 trillion a month being spent as this deficit just climbs into the stratosphere. There is no possible way that anybody can rein in Congress, or stop the military-industrial complex, or stop Big Pharma from doing the things they're doing. It's just, there's nothing you and I can do. They're going to continue to do what they're doing. We have managed to get ourselves into a World War III scenario. And the World War III scenario is most assuredly coming. The fact that the Red Sea is now closed to all traffic, the Houthis out of Yemen have closed down the Red Sea. Only one ship transited the Red Sea this week. Everybody else has abandoned shipping through the Suez. This means that they either have to go around Africa, or there's a new route that's being proposed around Russia, or even the northern route through Canada. Those waters are not going to be tread until this coming spring or summer, when the ice melts. So in the meantime, you're going to see freight delays, you're going to see inordinate prices. And if the war goes hot, like it appears to be, because the Israelis have basically announced the intent to make war on Egypt and Lebanon. Now, today in Israel, there was something very significant that happened. There was something like, 200 rocket strikes in Israel that came out of Gaza. Gaza just absolutely unleashed on Israel an overwhelming number of missiles that allowed them to defeat the Iron Dome. And so these missiles were raining down on Israel. Hezbollah was using hypersonics in the northern section of the country to hit Kiryat Shimona. Hezbollah is getting ready to engage. British scientists have announced that the Israelis have been using neutron weapons in Gaza. Those are nuclear weapons, neutron bombs. They're tactical neutron weapons, but they're neutron weapons. And if this is true, this means that nuclear weapons, the nuclear threshold has been breached, which means that it gives the rest of the world, and particularly Israel's enemies, the license to use nuclear weapons in response. Okay? When you're the first one to use the nukes, someone else has the right to use nukes in response. The nuclear proliferation is going through the roof. North Korea is poised to make war against the United States. They just tested an ICBM that is capable of hitting the United States. Yesterday, they tested that. So, and no one knows how many nuclear weapons they have. No one knows how many nuclear weapons Iran has. We do know that Pakistan has 300. We do know that. We also know that our Minuteman, the last time we tested our Minuteman, our ICBM, the launch failed. It failed, which means that we're reliant upon our aircraft to deliver nuclear strikes in our enemy's territory. The situation in the Baltic has arisen to a high crisis level. The Baltic countries, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, these are the mice that roared. They're literally little tiny countries, and they're making all this trouble. And they're trying to cut Russia off from having contact with Kaliningrad, which is an isolated space belonging to Russia. And they blockaded it on land. And they're trying to blockade it at sea. And Poland is already calling it Königsberg, which was its name before Russia took the city. And the most alarming fact is that the United States has gotten permission from Finland to put 15 military bases in Finland. Now, this puts U.S. troops within 150 miles of St. Petersburg. And so this draws us ever closer to a direct confrontation, the United States versus Russia. And should we get into that kind of a confrontation, the United States versus Russia, Russia will not hesitate to use an overwhelming nuclear force against the United States. China has told Biden, we're going to take Taiwan. There's no question. We want to take it peaceably, but we're going to take Taiwan. There's no question. There's no debate about it. There is war flares with the Philippines. As you know, the Chinese have been blocking Philippine traffic in the South China Sea. And these kinds of confrontations are expanding. The Philippines has suffered a great many weather blows with huge cyclones smashing the country to bits. And now you have the Chinese doing an open threat against the Philippines. So we can see that probably the least likely, the least possible scenario is China going to war with Taiwan. That's probably in the back burner. Russia at war in Eastern Europe, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, possibly Finland. As Russia pointed out, Finland, Sweden, and Norway all have a smaller population than the city of Moscow. We're not talking about Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia I'm not even sure there's 1 million people in those countries. So you're talking, if a war breaks out in the Baltic, that war will have enormous consequences to Europe, because if Russia has to fight in Finland, then they're going to fight in Poland. In fact, the story that I've heard from on the ground intel in the Donbass region is that all the Ukrainian troops that the Russians are facing speak the Polish language. They're not Ukrainian at all. They're Poles, and they're the ones fighting in Ukraine. So that is what's happening in that sphere. What's happening in the Israeli sphere is that Israel is picking a war with all of its neighbors. And they are, I think, naive to think that Iran does not have nuclear weapons. They're certainly naive to think that Turkey doesn't have nuclear weapons. And they're naive to think that the Muslim world is going to sit back and do nothing forever. That's an incorrect assessment. The Houthis are likely to lead the charge. And if we have to put American troops in Yemen, this is going to be a huge mistake. The American military is completely demoralized. It's falling apart at the seams. They can't meet any recruitment goals. People are leaving in droves. They won't come back because of the mandatory vax. They won't come back because of, in order to advance, the guys had to put on high heels. They weren't going to do it. They left. And so that was the end of that story. So now you have a demoralized nation. You have a nation whose foreign policy is completely collapsed. In January 2nd, 180 nations are going to join the BRICS protocol. And they're going to completely abandon the dollar, which is going to be it's going to signal a massive hyperinflation on the dollar. So you can look at the value of the dollar collapsing. You can look at our foreign relationships collapsing. You can look at our industrial and manufacturing base completely closing. We're about to go into the deepest, darkest economic position we have been in ever in the history of country. It's going to dwarf the Great Depression of the 1930s. That's why I'm saying, get to know your chickens and don't give them names, because you might have to put them on the dinner table. Okay? Do not give your chickens names, even though they're a domestic fowl. Don't do that. Even though they're a domestic fowl, don't do that. So anyway, so the things to think about are community, building your community, in particular your physical community around you, who your friends are, who you can trust, who you can call upon. Get yourself backup means of communication, namely CBs and ham radios. You can use walkie-talkies too in some short range stuff, but you need to get these kinds of things. You need to prepare yourself in terms of having a garden, having chickens, getting a meat supply that's not from the store, because the store bought meat supply is going to be infected with bugs. So the main thing we have to look at is that there's going to be a convulsion in the United States. The United States is going to shift and reshape, and it's going to be something entirely new by the time it's done. And it will not be the corporate thing that it is right now, the corporate monster it is right now. The war in the Middle East has a strong chance of becoming World War III. There's a major war going on in Sudan. There's a war about to break out in Venezuela. That war could reach into Brazil. There's a war between China and Myanmar going on. There's confrontation between the Indian and Chinese borders. There is a potential war between Niger and Nigeria in Western Africa because they have rejected the French. And of course, revolution is at the doorstep in every major European country. I didn't say anything about Australia, Robbie. I didn't say anything about revolution in Australia. And I didn't want you to say anything either. We're on social media. Okay. All right. So with that, guys, I'm going to wrap us up tonight. And I want to thank you guys for joining us in the Zoom. And I want to thank the guys who have joined us in the chat here tonight. I hope this has been a good conversation, and I hope we have talked about a lot of the things that you wanted to talk about. Oh, Light asked, what about the two witnesses will come? And do you think they're actual people or groups of people? Well, when we talk about the two witnesses, you're going to have to go back and read Zechariah 3. Read Zechariah 3, and that will give you the clue as to who the two witnesses are. Okay, so I'm going to thank you guys. Thanks for being a part of Cepher Moments. Visit us at Cepher Publishing Group, cepher.net. If you want instruction, now Cepher Academy is going to be taking the week off, the first week of January, and then we're going to be resuming new classes and continuing some classes. Check at cepheracademy.net if you want to join those classes. Thanks for being a part of this, you guys. Subscribe if you want to chat in the chat, and we will see you next week. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a good week.